I was working on a compliance return, and I had mistranslated an exchange rate and done the form and we'd filed the return. And so, I'd gone out that night, right? Great, we had filed the return. And the next morning I was thinking about it and I'm like, gosh, those numbers just seemed really straight. Like, I was like, God, the numbers were so big. Like, they were really big numbers. And I was just reflecting on it. And I checked the return the next day, but it had been filed, right? I had checked the return the next day. And anyway, well, the punchline was I had done the exchange rate backwards, right? So I had done it so that the exchange rate was inverse. And so, at that moment I was like, what do I do? I mean, shaking, crying, what do you do at that moment? The return's filed, right? So, there's really only one thing to do at that point.
Our next guest is deeply passionate about the power of mentorship and paving the way for the next generation. She's small in stature, but packs a big punch in the world of tax. Marna Ricker is EY's Global Vice Chair of Tax and oversees all parts of EY's global tax business line, which has $12 billion in revenue and over 76,000 professionals worldwide. Today, we discuss all things related to mentorship, including the role it plays in Marna's personal and professional life as she rose through the ranks at EY. Marna shares how every business owner gains value from giving and receiving mentorship. And without doubt, it's one of the best ways to grow yourself, your team, and your business. Stick around to learn more about the power of mentorship with Marna Rickers. Marna, tell us a bit about your sort of key highlights in this fantastic leadership journey that you've had.
Yeah, no problem. So again, a tax professional by a background. And so did my undergrad in really just business, a BA, and at Ohio State, and then went on to law school at the University of Cincinnati and really have a love of the numbers and a love of the law. So tax is frankly a perfect fit for me, and it's been an extraordinary opportunity to learn that on a global basis. There are 220 million laws on the books right now, so it's extraordinarily dynamic. It changes almost every day, and so it's really something that can keep your mind and really, really active. And obviously every company is unique and different. And so it's a really dynamic profession, and one that I've really enjoyed over almost 30 years.
And just explain a little bit your role at EY, if you could.
Yeah, happy to. So an international tax partner by background. So, working on cross-border types of transactions and movements, and then have moved into a variety of different roles for the firm. And so most recently was the Americas and U.S. Vice Chair of Tax. And then a little over a year ago, I moved into the global role. So I'm now the Global Vice Chair of Tax for EY. So that's about 77,000 amazing tax professionals and about 3,700 partners on a global basis.
Sounds like quite a role, Marna. And I was going to ask this question much later in the interview, but it feels right now. So how can you convince people that tax professionals aren't boring?
Well, I just think of what I just said. It was they're very clever. They're very, very smart. They're very dynamic. Everything we do from a tax perspective is based in a business, aligned to the business and the complexity of a business and how businesses are deploying capital. How they're obviously thinking about the movement of their people and their assets and the investment decisions they're going to make. And so, they're really just applying the tax rules around the world to those capital decisions and those people movement decisions and those asset decisions. And so that's a pretty dynamic career, if you ask me. And so they're very smart and dynamic and clever and obviously witty and I would say fun people who to dedicate their obviously careers to doing so.
Yeah, man, I have to second that. I was only talking to my accountant yesterday, and they are a very, very important part of my team. And he does have a sense of humour as well, so I'm very lucky about
They
that.
tend
We can have a bit of a laugh
they
and a joke
tend to
about
be
things.
self-deprecating and obviously that we know what our profiles look like, right? We know that we are pinstripe suits and a calculator and a pencil. So I think we tend to be self-deprecating as well.
Understand. Well, Marna, look, our topic around sort of mentee, mentor, menteeship, mentorship. You've had a lifelong career in EY, and I'm sure that will continue in this massive role that you have. What's the our audience are business owners, generally small business owners. You're in a massive business, one of the biggest businesses around. What can you teach? What can you share with our audience specifically around menteeship and mentorship?
Yeah, maybe, I would say no matter what size organization you're in, I think it's extraordinarily valuable. I would say there's, at all stages of my life and certainly career, when I was young, it was a gymnastics teacher, right? When I moved into business or when I went to school, it was a teacher. When I was in law school, it was my tax professor who was, really, really influential on my career choice. Ultimately, when I moved into work, to your point, it was, I found mentors and mentees to be extraordinarily, I'll go mentors first, extraordinarily valuable, when you're in your most vulnerable state, right? So whether that's you've made a mistake, right? Or, you're making a big decision personally or professionally, I think your mentors are, extraordinarily valuable. So, to me, that's, you always want to have, somebody you can turn to, in those moments that you feel really comfortable with. And that tends to be, you're comfortable because of a personal, connection or a personal, trust. It's a safe place to have a conversation. And so I think you want to have those stored up for those, those moments. I think from a mentee perspective, from my perspective, because I valued those so much, personally and professionally throughout my life, I feel a really strong, need to pay that forward, right? That might be the right way to say it, just to give that back, and make sure that others have that same, that exact same, safe place to come get that. So that need to pay it forward, and so carve out and a lot of time to make sure that is that's available to others and to pay that forward. So spend a lot of time on doing that exact same thing. So, and frankly, every time I use one of my mentors, I say, oh gosh, have I given that same space or that same amount of time, right back? It's a friendly reminder to make sure I'm carving that out on my calendar very specifically.
Yeah, fantastic. Certainly value-added time, absolutely. How do you define a mentor and a mentee?
Yeah. So mentor, like I said, sort of the attributes I think that matter from a mentor is, it is a trusted place, so it's somewhere that you can go and say whatever you need to say. It's a place that I think there's a personal connection. I don't mean like personal as in like you have to do things outside of work, but there's some level of trust there. There's a level of connection. There is a level of respect, in that conversation. So there's a sort of equal take, back and forth, and it can have been formed, however, right? It can be formed through, as I said, a teacher relationship. I used a gymnastics instructor. I used a professor in college. It can be it can be a boss that you've just formed a relationship with. It can be someone you met, through a conference. It can come in any form, but you've created then some interactions that allow for that type of trusted space. A mentee obviously is someone where you created it, but you're the more senior person, right? You're the person that that they're seeking advice from, but it still has that same space. It still has that same space from my perspective. And typically the mentee is the one reaching out, right? It tends to be the person you're reaching out and initiating that kind of conversation. And, I'm when someone reaches out, like I say, yes, because I know when I'm reaching out, I'm really hoping that the person's going to respond on the other side, because I'm typically reaching out because I'm in need of some counsel, right? Or I'm in need of some advice. And so I try to be really responsive when people are reaching out. Meaning I'm trying to respond within 24 hours, right? If somebody's reaching out via text or a ping or an email, or, because I'm guessing that that's what they need on the other side.
Do you think then you could use, say, that term role model interchangeably with, say, mentor?
I wouldn't necessarily. It could be. Many of my mentors are also role models, but Martha and I were having this conversation, or I've had this conversation with many people. Like, there are people that are role models for me that aren't my mentor. So, I'll use Mike Krzyzewski. So like, he's a amazing basketball coach. Maybe not everybody knows who he is. He was a coach at Duke University. He coached the Olympic basketball, or a U.S. Olympic basketball team. And so like, he's a role model for me. And I've read a lot of pieces. I've watched him coach on TV, but I don't know him. Right. So I've seen him speak, but I don't know him. He's not a mentor to me, but he's certainly a role model to me. Like, I would like to, I emulate, some of the things that he does as a leader, but but he's not a mentor to me. I don't know him. I'm not in a personal relationship with him. I'd love to be, but I don't know him. So I think they can be the same. Many of my mentors are role models to me, but certainly, but I don't think they have to be.
Sounds like you might have to reach out on LinkedIn.
I might. You're right. Maybe he has more time in retirement.
To this show.
That's right.
Absolutely. There's a couple of times you mentioned your gymnastics instructor, and I'm making an assumption that was maybe when you were a little bit younger. So what sort of mentorship, and obviously you're looking back at that very favorably based on your facial expressions, what sort of mentorship did that gymnastics instructor give you at that time in your life?
So look, it's sports in general, and again, I certainly see it with my own children. There's so many, I think, lessons that, and again, it could be anything. It could be a chess club, just team and group activity. For me, it happened to be sports. For my children, it happens to be sports. So I think there's so much to be learned in work ethic and commitment, and in working inside of a team, and in failure, right? Like losing and sportsmanship, and those life lessons that come from, like I said, it doesn't have to be sports, but anything where you're committing yourself to a group and a team, and that piece. And so it was having somebody who was a coach, right? Who early in life, who was teaching you're learning how to be a young adult, and you're learning disappointment, and you're learning work ethic, and you're learning communication, and so I think that she was such a big, and I did it for a long time, for a 15-year journey with her since I was really young. And so she was uniquely impactful because you had a parent. I had my mother and my father, but I also had a gymnastics instructor at such a developmental window of time, and I was with her for a really long time. She has passed away since, but I just remember that window very, very fondly accordingly.
Yeah, I can certainly see that in your expressions. How is that sort of mentorship, say, in your situation, that younger situation versus sort of now? Does that relationship change? Does it vary at all? And if so, can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, I guess I think you're, as an adult, you know more, you become, maybe wiser. I think when you're younger, you're learning a lot of things just as a human. You're not as mature in your capabilities, your listening skills, right? So there's probably more emotional, and if anyone who has kids, or you're an aunt or an uncle, or a teacher of young kids, God, bless all the kindergartner teachers out there, right? So that's very different than obviously
not an easy job,
exactly, than teaching at the the collegiate level. So maybe that would be the way I would say that looks and feels different, right? You're maybe I'll go back to Coach Krzyzewski. Like what I really appreciated about him as a coach is how he would coach a collegiate level athlete would be very different than how he would coach a Olympic team, right? He's in the Olympic team, he's coaching the very best athletes from the NBA, right? And so that's very different, and a very different group of elite athletes, right, who are all the very best in the top of the game. How do you bring them together as a team to perform as a team rather than individuals, versus at the collegiate level, right? And so again, he had really specific things on how you coach each individual. And so I really respect, that aspect or element of being a leader and how you bring that together. And so if you think about, relaying that to your audience, Brendan, when you look at each person on your team or each person in your organization, which I feel like I try to do, like, what are their strengths? Like, what are their strengths? And how do you be a strength finder? How do you position them for their strengths ultimately, as opposed to trying to fix their weak spots, And so, what are their ambitions? What do they want to accomplish? And then play to that, right? Ultimately, rather than, we're only going to move so far on our weak spots. Like, we're maybe, if we're if you're on the scale of 1 to 5, we're probably only going to move from a 3 to a 4, right? On our weak spots, we're not going to move to a 5. Right. So we're much better off, in my mind, to play to our strengths.
I like that angle, and it sort of speaks to the collegiate level and the Olympic level. It's almost like at the collegiate level, there's probably an element of mentorship, which is maybe even more competence related versus Olympic, which is more character, people, human skill related. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because you're nodding profusely.
I think and again, I just look at the different teams I get to work with, and you're exactly right. We have brand new staff. That's a very different set of skills you're teaching than, our top and high performing partners, right? Those are very different things skills that you're teaching. To your point, I look at my own children, right? Like my husband and I are very focused on different things as they've grown up. To your point, I have different expectations of them accordingly as well. And so you're spot on. I mean, you're going to adjust your mentorship, like coming back to that concept, you're going to adjust your mentorship in your words, like, and I'd say to, our highest performing people, like, I have really high expectations of you, but I have absolutely no doubt you're going to achieve them. And here are those small tweaks, right? Just for you to make around the edges to keep, elevating your performance accordingly. And so it's just, it's just these small things that they're doing to elevate even more. But you're letting them know you have complete confidence in them, flying through, your incredibly high expectations of them. So, because that's their ambition. Now, if that's not their ambition, you're going to have a different conversation, but you want to make sure you know what their ambitions are too.
Do you see your role as a mother, as a mentor to your children?
I do, for sure. For sure. Because again,
tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about what they want to accomplish. I mean, Eric and I are, very much like, look, you can be anything you want to be, and our job is just to help you be that. But those things are your choices, right? And so, we're not going to make those choices for you. So, when they're little, you're making some choices for them, right? So, but as they grow into young adults, then you're frankly just, you're mentoring them in the choices they've made. So, you have to make some choices for them. You can't, they don't get to eat brownies all day or, Twinkies all day, right? So you're making some choices for them, but you're when they're young adults, you're letting them make choices, and then you're guiding and mentoring them through those choices so that they learn to make good choices, right? They learn the consequences of choice. So.
Absolutely. Probably not used enough in this world today, the consequences of choice. But
you gotta let them fail.
We've talked a lot about this,
right? You gotta let them fail, right? So we let them fail and understand the consequence of that.
Absolutely. And be there to help them pick them up and unpack sort of how they could have done something a little bit differently. But like you said, if you don't have a few hits, a few scrapes on the knees along the way, then when the world gets bigger and badder and tougher, very difficult to deal with, isn't it? And talking back to the business mentorship side. So let's nail this down to why should business owners seek mentorship? They're running a busy business, hopefully fairly successful. They've got to a point and they've maybe not considered this sort of opportunity for them. Why convince them why it's such a powerful thing? This is why, as a small business owner, you should seek mentorship.
Yeah. So absolutely. So look, I think there are so many perspectives that are valuable to their business, to your business, to our business, right? And so I am constantly, and I truly look at my calendar every week and say, have I reached out to, someone from a different perspective? So have I talked to other companies? Have I talked to our alliance partners, have I even talked to our competitors, right? And so truly, am I seeking other perspectives to make sure I'm not missing something, to make our business better, to collaborate, to think about ecosystems, right? To talk to startup companies, to make sure that, do we want to do an acquisition? Do we, is there something we're missing that's going to disrupt our business? And so you want to seek different perspectives. I mean, you really want to seek different perspectives, again, whether it's from a mentorship perspective, or it's frankly just to learn, right? To become curious and to learn and to keep evolving. And so, I think it's really, really important not to become too insular, to just hear the same perspectives inside your own business or your own echo chamber. So super, super important. And it's something I pay attention to on my actual calendar, on whether I've gotten enough outside-in perspectives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Have you got a set time that you sort of try? Again, you're a busy person, busy professional, lots of challenges on your time, I'm sure. Have you got a perspective on the time you like to spend in a weekly scenario on that sort of case?
So I have a set amount of time, to your point on, have I spent enough time outside, right? And so when I define outside, right, that can be with our clients, that can be with our alliances, that can be with ecosystem partners, that can be with acquisition targets, right, to your point. So I have an opinion about how much outside time I've spent, right, in that category, which that would be my advice or my counsel. Like, how much time are you spending outside your organization, as opposed to just internal? Internal is very important. I'm not suggesting it's not. You've got to get outside in perspectives as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to get caught in the bubble,
Exactly.
so to speak. Just flipping it quickly on the other side of the coin is, as a business owner, what value do business owners get, or could they get, in being a mentor to others?
So maybe the same thing. And again, I think this is where we early on, when this is probably a good decade ago, we had this, when we were all learning a bit more on technology. Now I would consider myself, quite capable on the technology front. We had this, sort of joke about we all should have, digital mentees, right? And so that they would make us tech savvy. And now I can say I can hold my own, and maybe my kids have been quite helpful in that too. But again, in spots that you think you have blind spots, even, right? I would encourage people to make sure that they're, that they invest in even those places from a mentee perspective. But you're going to learn a lot, from the listening side of having a mentee as well. So you're going to learn as much as you're helping and supporting about different perspectives. And so, for me, I'm learning a ton about, different generations. Again, in the workforce, ultimately, at one time I did have a digital, I'll call it a digital mentee, right? And so learning a lot about technology, about how they consume, about how they learn. And so again, you can have ones that are mentees intentionally that are topical, but you're also going to learn just a lot about your own organization. To the extent you're mentoring inside of your own organization, you're going to learn a lot just from your own organization. About, like I said, about your own organization, but about what they think of, leadership, what they think of your organization, and what they think about all kinds of things going on in your organization, right? And so it'll be really insightful. And you have no idea what kind of direction that will take, what kind of form or direction that will take. Other than it, and obviously it's really fulfilling. Really, really fulfilling to be able to have those kinds of conversations.
Let's, again, focusing on your career, Marna. So how you mentioned at the top of the show, actually, about mentors being around in times of vulnerability for you and stuff like that. So at the point to you're comfortable, can you share a scenario where that mentorship has just really come in so invaluable, and you felt quite vulnerable in that position, whether that's on your journey through the ranks of EY?
Happy to. So there are lots of examples, and so I'm truly happy.
You give me as many as you like.
I'm happy to. But when you think about that question, right? Sort of these, there are big things that happen and certainly in your career that you think about, and so but like I said, they typically happen when you're in a vulnerable, like the most important moments happen when you're in a vulnerable position. So they're ones where you've made some kind of mistake, right? So you've made a mistake in your work. or they're ones where you've been asked, to take a new role, or something's happening personal, very personal in your life that you need counsel around. And so, yeah, I'm happy to. I had shared, I'd reflected on this in another conversation I was having, and I had, really, really, really early on in my career, this is like when I was, I think I was a senior, and I was working on a compliance return, and I had mistranslated an exchange rate and done the form, and we'd filed the return. And so, I'd gone out that night, right? Great. We had filed the return. And the next morning I was thinking about it, and I'm like, gosh, those numbers just seemed really straight. Like, I was like, God, the numbers were so big. Like, they were really big numbers. And I was just reflecting on it. And I checked the return the next day, but it had been filed, right? I checked the return the next day. And anyway, the punchline was I had done the exchange rate backwards. Right. So I had done it so that the exchange rate was inverse. And so, at that moment I was like, what do I do? I mean, shaking, crying, like, what do you do at that moment? The return's filed. Right. So, there's really only one thing to do at that point, which is tell the truth. Right. So I certainly went and told my boss, who was also a mentor of mine. And he's like, there's nothing we can do but call the client. Right. We need to call the client. And, obviously we fixed it on our own nickel, but it was I was convinced I would be fired. And that was a big deal, right? To obviously filed the return. So of course we amended it, we fixed it. I wanted to tell the client myself, it was my mistake. And I did. And it obviously ended up strengthening, I should say, obviously it strengthened the relationship, but they weren't happy either. And so anyway, it was just an example of, a very vulnerable position. I felt safe going to that mentor despite being very nervous about it. And, but it was ultimately something that strengthened the relationship. And so, but that was someone if it was someone I didn't have a relationship with, or had not been a mentor to me, I think that would have been far more difficult, right? Far, far more difficult to go have that conversation. Maybe other times where I'd say my having two children was a really vulnerable time for me. And so, I was asked to move at a time that I had, people didn't know I was pregnant, but I was asked to move into a new role with my first child. And so again, really vulnerable position, really excited about the new role, but also didn't feel like it was the right time to move in the middle of that. And my husband's mother had passed away as well. And so anyway, just a really, again, very vulnerable. So mentors are, again, a moment where you can call someone. I don't want anyone to know I'm pregnant, right? Like, but I also don't think it's the right time to take a new role and to move. So, but don't want anybody to know I'm pregnant either, right? So, and so again, really, vulnerable time, but great time to have mentors to really, to help you through that. There's also been moments where I've not, been my best self in a big meeting, where I've not positioned something the way I wanted to position it. Maybe I've had I've not said something the way I wanted. It didn't come out the way I wanted. And so, I've gone to a mentor and said, what do I do with this? Like, how do I, reposition this? How do I handle this fact pattern, not knowing sort of how to I was in a new role, not knowing necessarily how to navigate, new players, I was at a new level. And so, again, really, really valuable to know how to go clean that back up and how to navigate that in a really, helpful, constructive way. Right. So I think those are just examples when you say, like, where are you in a vulnerable position, right? Like, oh, yeah, I know that didn't go well, but, I don't quite know how to handle something like that at this new level or in this new role. So super, super valuable, right?
And taking those approaches on those scenarios you shared, how has that strengthened you? How do you think it strengthened you?
Yeah, look, I think you learn then how to handle on your own, right? And so, I think you really, you gain confidence in your ability that when that comes up, like now in those same kind of meetings, I know how to clean it up right there. right? Like right in the moment, I know like, hey, let me reframe that. That didn't come out right. Like I'm reading the room, I'm reading the person, right? I know how to, to reframe. Hopefully I'm not doing that again, but I'm learning how to reframe it right then. Like I'm watching the room, I'm watching the reaction of the person, I'm looking at their facial expressions, and I'm having the ability to reframe at the moment, as opposed to having to come back to it, at a later point. So that it's just building skill and building confidence in my ability to handle it, right then. And then you can pass that on, going back to the mentee conversation, like, hey, you're going to have this meeting. These are the kinds of things you're going to be watching for. These are the kinds of things you're going to be looking for. I suspect these are going to be the hard points, or, these are going to be the friction points in that meeting. This is what I'd be anticipating. These are the kinds of words you're going to want to use and you're going to want to watch. This is who I'd let go first. So you can do just a lot more coaching from your own experience on what those moments are going to look like. So I think back to that mentor-mentee.
Well, it doesn't appear to have affected your career too much, Marna. You've still progressed, which is a good sign.
I do a lot of apologizing. So maybe a lot of cleanup, Brendan.
Well, that's good. That's also a sign of vulnerability, which is a strength in my book. It may be a little bit out of scope, but what sparked my ears was the pregnancy and the secret. What was the secret around the pregnancy? Why did you feel that had
more just early, like right? It was more that it was early. I was just very early pregnant, right? So it's, typically, just making sure I was getting out of my first, first few months. And so it was just that, right? So, yeah. So that was it.
It also, some of the examples, I was hoping for something way juicier, Marna.
I know. Those felt really juicy to me.
Something to make the public relations people squirm in their seats and stuff like that.
That's all I got. That's all I got.
All right. I'll keep digging.
All right. I'll keep thinking.
You spoke a little bit without saying it specifically, but the relationship that's needed between mentor and mentee. Speak a little bit to how important that is and what is important to that relationship. What do you think is considered the most important thing in that relationship to have this great mentor-menteeship thing that actually works?
I think honesty is probably the biggest one, right? I think, when I think of like my relationships with my mentors and my relationships with my mentees, it is probably just being really straight about what it is you're struggling with and what you need help with, right? Like there's some people that I feel like I'm, like where I haven't gotten in a rhythm with, like that I'm working on building a relationship with, where I feel like they're not necessarily really getting to the heart of what they want to ask me, or maybe they're not quite being vulnerable enough, like about what they really want to get at with me. But you can tell. And so I'll work hard to try to create that space, but we just don't quite get there. And I think of similarly, right? Like I think of people I've not necessarily been able to build my own relationship with, from a mentor perspective, like that space just doesn't seem to be opening up, on the other side. Right. And so, it's more challenging for me to get, really, really deep advice from, right. Deep advice from that person as well. And so I think it's this willingness to have a level of vulnerability on both sides and trust on both sides. Right. That seems to be at the heart of the ones that I can say are like my most, extraordinary relationships. Mutual respect. I was thinking of some of my mentors that are, have retired from the firm as well. Like that there's a real mutual respect in the relationship on both sides, trust and, respect as well on both sides.
Are you ever too senior to have a mentor?
No, not a chance.
So who's your current mentor and what do they provide you?
I have lots. So not just one. So again, people who have retired from the firm, clients, so clients who have, again, are either still with that company or have retired from the organization. So clients I've worked for. And again, I have coaches that are still my mentors. So lots. People I still continue to meet that alliance partners that I reach out to for some coaching on things. So I keep meeting people that are really, really good that I admire, I respect, and seem to form a relationship with. So lots of mentors, that people that I would consider mentors.
So what you're saying, and just to reiterate this point, which I think is a really valid one, that don't, as a business owner or anybody in business, don't consider that you just need to have a mentor or be a mentee to one person. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship. There's different things that you will see and get, and the support from different people who have different skill sets.
Absolutely. And reach out to the one, like, again, to your point, like I have he and I keep trying to get lunch. I can't wait to like sink into the booth and have this conversation with him. I have a long-standing mentor. I was probably a manager when I met him, and he was, he was CFO of the company at the time, became ultimately the CEO, and now does consulting for turnaround companies. And so, he's just a really strategic mind. And so there's some strategy things I want to talk to him about. And so, he's been a mentor of mine for 20 plus years. And so again, I'm going to him specifically because he's, just someone I really respect and really enjoy. But also there's strategy things I really want to talk to him about. He's really, we're in the midst of a new CEO, and he's great at strategy. And so I just really am going to enjoy a strategy conversation with him.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. We talked a little bit earlier about your family and relationship and how important that is, and this great man behind this great woman. I should say this greater man behind this great woman.
He is greater.
What sort of mentorship and maybe menteeship that happens between yourself and your husband that just makes this work?
That's a great question. And maybe it's we have this deal and we don't need to use it as much anymore. But I would say that 20 years ago, we used it a ton. And so we had this is pre-kids, we had this agreement that if I was, I was frankly learning how to, because I, hadn't been married and we met later in life. And so we had this sort of agreement on, like, if I was working too much, or if I was, I love my work. And so I sort of had this intensity to it. Right. I didn't have anybody at home. So I was like, I'm going to go for it. Right. So we had this agreement that he was sort of my regulator on that, like, hey, like, we're done. Right. And so we just, now that we have kids and sort of lots of other things, right, our life is full and busy in that way. So it's just, we don't need that as much, but he was the guy, like, he was sort of like, all right, we're out. Like, we're done for the day, done for the weekend, done for the, sort of done for the, whatever. And like, here are our vacations. So he was, again, just a really good mentor in like that pace and creating space and clearing my head, and just really, really good at that. He's a great mentor in that balance. Because, ultimately, I do have a strong point of view that you need to clear your head to create space for whatever, right? To trust, to listen to your, the idea will come when your head is clear. And when you go inside for the answer, and you trust your gut, your conscience, whatever you want to call it, like, you got to get your head clear for great thinking. So anyway, so he was a great mentor in that way, of like too much going. He would tap my leg. Actually, we had a sign for it too. He would tap my knee, like, all right, you're done. We had a signal.
Slow down, Marna. It's enough. Slow down. I can definitely relate. It sounds a lot to what my wife is to me. She's a sort of the balancing act, and hey, slow down, or we need to take a break, or whatever that is. Because again, I mean, we are both fortunate. If you love your work, it's easy to get so invested in it and want to do such a good job and stuff like that. You can get taken away very easily, can't you?
Right, Brendan. And so, like, having that balance, like, he's just a great life partner accordingly. Right? Great with our kids, funny, amazing.
Sounds like a decent human being, absolutely. He's one of the stars of the show, and he doesn't even know it.
I think he knows.
On the EY side, Marna, so does EY have a formal mentorship program that they push, and if so, what's your involvement in that?
So we do. It tends to be more based around our inclusivity and our DE&I efforts, to your point, Brendan. And so I am formally involved in that. So we have a GSET council at the global level, and then So anyway, so where we are paired, very directly and very intentionally. And so I have mentors through those very formal channels. But I think maybe the more important thing, or the thing that I love about the firm, and we're a services organization. And so, but I wouldn't have known this when I joined EY, right? I felt it going back to turning inward and my gut. When I joined the organization, I could feel it. Right. So I interviewed a ton to try to figure out what organization I wanted to join. But, everybody was different, but there was a values-based, feel, and I was looking for, I wanted everybody to look and feel different because I looked and felt different, but there was a consistency in values and what people said and how they felt and culture that is true today. And so that piece was really, really, really important to me. So that's what I was looking for. And so I go back to this, when we get to this mentee conversation, that piece of it doesn't matter to me what people want to achieve. I just want to know what it is, so that ultimately my job is to position them accordingly, right? So whatever that is, I think that's possible at EY, and that's my truth. And then my job is to position that accordingly, right? And so, I think there's endless possibilities here, and we happen to be in a place that has this extraordinarily inclusive culture and values that. And so, I think that's what's unique about being here. So we don't get it right every day. I'm not suggesting we're perfect. We're not. We are not. So, but I think we're pretty darn good. And so I think that's what I've loved. That's why I've stayed, and why I've enjoyed it. So,
yeah, fantastic. Can you, in your own role, or even before maybe the role that you're in now, can you share a story where you've maybe had that mentor role and you've had a mentee, officially or unofficially, but it's the situation that you've helped them through is really, it's lit you up big time.
Yeah, I have. So the really fun part for us is we get to promote people apart.
I have to say, Marna, sorry to be rude and stop you there, but every time we start to talk about that stuff, you lean in your chair, you really lean into it, get so excited. I can just see your face just go buzz.
Well, thank you. We so again, this is one of the foundation of our work, right? Is of EY it's an experiential learning culture, right? So we get to work in teams, and we get to work right next to people every day. It's sort of the foundation of the way that we it's foundation of our strategy, right? And so the big piece of that ultimately is that we get to promote people to partner, right? And so it's a massive piece. And so that's probably one of my favorite things. And one of the badge of honors that we all get to wear is, how many people have you ultimately brought into the partnership and promoted into the partnership? And so that's probably, every year we have a day where we celebrate the new partners. And so that's the best day of the year. So anyway, and getting to make those calls, getting to be on those calls, right, is the biggest, gift to ultimately get to. So that's, to me, those are the proudest days in the partnership. And so again, that's where I'd say, we plot them, who's going to be on the call, how are we going to do the call, what are we going to say? And so it's joyful. It's really, really joyful. I'll never forget who called me, one of my mentors, right? Who called me, what did that look like? And then, I certainly know that the partners that I, again, was very active, mentored since they were young, hired off of campus, and then had the pleasure of calling, and still today, get to call. That's the beauty of the partnership. So anyway.
Yeah, it does sound like a very good fabric running through. Also, from your LinkedIn activity, it looks like you get a chance to do that in person from time to time, which also, based on the photo, seems to light you up quite a bit. It's so fun.
We have a new partner meeting every year, which now, I get to go to at the global level. So, and it's and they get to bring their significant others or their spouses or whoever they'd like to bring, right? So if you're married, typically your spouse, and then if not, you can bring a parent, you can bring a friend, a significant other, and it's a joyous event, an absolute joyous event. So very fun. Yeah,
sounds like awesome fun. Marna, I'm sure there has been so many bits of advice that you've received on your journey through the ranks of EY, but if you could sort of, something that pops into your mind now is that bit of advice that's really helped you from a mentor to you being the mentee on your trajectory through EY. If you could share that, that would be fantastic.
I saw this great quote. I was just at a meeting the other day, and I saw this great quote, and I thought it was it was probably one that shaped, it probably was one that shaped advice I had been given. And so I'll share the quote itself, but it said, if you want to swim for new horizons, you have to be willing to no longer see the shore, which kind of scared the heck out of me. I was like, if I were in the ocean and I was swimming for new horizons, like I could see the sunset and I was swimming for new horizons, but I would have to no longer see the shore. And I was like, which is like, that kind of scared the heck out of me, right? Literally, like, right. Cause I'm okay with a lake, but I don't necessarily love the ocean. So, there's sharks in there, right? Big things in there. But it was really, 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 like, it struck me as, cause I've always been relatively fearless. But it really struck me on growth. Like, like if you're going to go for it and you're really going to grow, you kind of have to let go of, what was behind you. And I've always been really, really good at it, being relatively fearless, but I was like, like, am I that fearless? Like that I'd be willing to swim for a new horizon and let go of like all that. So it was just a friendly reminder. And we have a new chair, and she's amazing. And she's really pushing us to swim for new horizons and let go of the shore. So I thought it was a really great quote. And I've been given that advice, I've been given that advice, and all along my career, I've been really fearless about it. And I love the quote. I was like, okay, am I letting go? Like, will I no longer see the shore? So I thought it was really,
I do love it as well. I happen to swim every day as part of my exercise routine at the beach. So I've got these thoughts in my head that we swim a certain distance out, but believe me, we can see the shore.
There you go, Brendan.
I'd have to swim a hell of a long way out to not see the shore, and I'm not prepared to do that at the moment.
So there you go. I'm not giving that advice swimming, but I thought it was a great quote.
I get the analogy very much, and I can see where, when you put that into the real sense of the quote, but then put that to your life, that's it, isn't it? Like, there's just, as I say, there's no growth in the comfort zone, and you just have to keep pushing yourself. But sometimes you've got to be very, very uncomfortable and very, very vulnerable to make that level of growth.
It was I know the other quote I saw that really resonated with me. It was an I am because we are. Like, it was a very, like, for the greater, piece of the organization, and very, like, let go of that. We are, I am because we are. It was, they both really resonated with me, and there are pieces of advice I've been given. So anyway, I thought I'd share them. They're my own, they're advice I'm digesting in my own, growth. So
I love it, Marna. That I am because we are, that's the foundation of Ubuntu leadership, which we did an episode with somebody on Ubuntu leadership way back when. But it's fascinating, and just the sort of community growth that happens out of that. So a lot to be learned from that sort of philosophy, definitely.
Well, I really loved it. It's a way better word than teaming or collaborating, or right. It just has this different circle to it.
A bit overused buzzwords, aren't they?
I sort of was like, I'm done with those. I loved I am because we are, right?
Again, a bit off topic, but you've worked in EY for a long time. There must be some corporate buzzwords. I know I had to have therapy to try and get them out of my vocabulary, but what are some of these corporate buzzwords that you just can't stand?
I'm a pretty positive person. I'll have to think about that one. I'm a pretty positive, and we're right in the middle of this, a really, really exciting window, right? When you welcome in a new chair, and you're on this, this amazing foundation of just success that you've had, and yet you're about to, to undertake your next 50 billion of growth, right? Like it's just a really exciting window in time. And I was really proud of where our firm has been in the last, 12 to 18 months. And so you're just at this moment of launch. And so it's, I don't know, it'd be hard for me to find one right now. So maybe ask me in 2 years, but it's a pretty darn good time right now, Brendan. And so
maybe you just put a little post note on your thing
call
and
me
say,
in
get
2
back to
years.
Brendan about corporate buzzwords.
But it's awfully good right now. So
Done. Marna, how about, and I can't sort of leave a conversation like this. Again, I've been in corporate, I haven't been in the business the size of EY, but some global shipping businesses, and like office politics is just a thing, whether you're a small business or a large business, it is just a thing, right? What sort of advice have you been given in your journey through the ranks of EY about dealing with office politics?
So at all levels, right? And so at all levels, you're spot on, and depending on what level you're at, the general advice I've been given is stay out of it, right? And so, and I think this comes back to, right? I mean, and give it to my kids. So, I think you have to decide what you ultimately stand for. And so I sort of tell my kids the same thing. I tell myself the same thing. Like there's just sort of a golden rule. Like if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. If you wouldn't say it directly to the person, then you don't get to say it to me. And so, I think I think you got to kind of stick to what are your values and, what are the golden rules that you hold around that. So I think it's kind of that simple in my mind. When things are shifting or moving, maybe the other piece of advice I've gotten is, you kind of put your head down and do your work, right? You focus on what your role is, your work is, and you do an extraordinary job at it. So you keep your eye on, your work. So keep it really simple.
I think it's, look, I get what you're saying, and it is, you also said it, like it is simple, but it's bloody hard in application too. So there's a level of relationship there and stuff like that. So like where do you, I mean, you can put your head down for so long, but if it's really have an impact on you or an impact on somebody in your team or even somebody outside of the team that, you care about and making sure the culture is right, like, what encouragement do you then give to people, even from a mentorship to a mentee that you may have?
It's a great, I appreciate you pressing that further in that comment. I think, look, you always have to be empathetic. Like, you have to listen and be extraordinarily empathetic. And to your point, if it's impacting your team in some intense way, I think, in that you got to listen and be empathetic, and you got to acknowledge it. Like you can't ignore it. If to me, that's, you're not being a authentic leader to ignore things that are impacting your team or impacting the organization either. You got to take that straight on. And then you have to turn around and say what you're going to do, what are you going to do with it or about it? But you can only control what's in your control. Going back to like, let's focus on the work we have and what we know right now, right? This is going to sort itself out. I'll tell you what I know when I know it. So, that's my
I can see that. And respectfully, I've seen photos of you in groups of people, and you are not a tall person.
Well said. I am short, blonde, and I talk fast.
But again, I mean, just in spending time with you today, and even the team that had a brief conversation before, like there's this thing about you. You may be small in stature, but you pack a big punch. And so, just again, in relation to sort of dealing with those sorts of things in office politics, like you have no doubt in my mind you've had to deal with it, even just as a woman and going through the ranks and stuff like that. Like, what's kept you strong on this sort of journey that you've been on? Because you're obviously strong, you've obviously got a presence around you, irrespective of being 5 foot high or whatever the hell you are, but short.
Exactly. Well said. 5 foot even. Look, I think
what kept you strong on this journey?
I think you have to be authentic, right? You sort of have to be grounded and authentic in that acknowledgement of whatever's going on. Like, there are there are days that I'll get on the call, like if things are intense, which is just not where we are right now as an organization. But there are, well, some days I'll just have a bad day. Maybe one of my sons is having a bad day, so I'm having a bad day. But there have been moments in the organization where where something is, maybe something's political. I'll get on the call and just call it and say it, like, hey, I'm having a bad day, or I'm having this challenge. I'm pretty open and honest and authentic about it. So I'm going to need a little help today, team. And I'll just say it. Maybe I'll ask somebody else to start the meeting. Hey, I was going to go first and I was going to give you guys a board update. Like, I need like 10 minutes to get myself together. So can we do the financial update first? Hey, James, can you do the financial update first? Right. So I'm pretty, like, if I don't, I'm willing to ask for help or to be direct on, like, when I'm not doing the best. So, because they're going to see it or feel it anyway. Like, we had this crazy situation where I totally and completely overslept because I was exhausted, having come off of totally overslept my own meeting. So, like overslept by like 10 minutes, like, and my alarm was going off. And so, gosh, God love the team. They started, like, they were like, who knows what's going on with her. And I was really new in role. So they started, covered for me, and like, I just got them and told them I overslept. I didn't make up something. Like, I just said, like, hey, I clearly am exhausted, right? Like, really tired. And I slept straight through my alarm, right? I mean, so.
As you said earlier, Marna, there's no perfect company, there's no perfect person. Unfortunately, I've had a similar situation where many, many years ago I was involved in running a session with our regional leaders coming in, and it was whilst I was in corporate. Thank God I wouldn't do that as a consultant, but a few too many drinks and stuff, and I was way late for the event as well. So I'm very humbled to know that the vice chair of yeah. And even when my son sleeps in occasionally and gets in late to work, I hope he doesn't listen to this episode, actually say, well, the vice chair of EY does it, I can do it.
It happens to all of us.
Oh, look, it does. It is one of those things. It is one of those things. Marna, again, on I guess getting back to the ongoing serious note, but you talk about this sort of uplifting the next generation, and I guess that's the undertone of the whole sort of mentorship, mentee-ship relationship. But why is that whole thing important? You can talk to that in the EY context, but I'd love you to talk to that just in the general context of business and life.
So, maybe I'll talk about it in business, and then we can certainly talk about it in life. I'm passionate about it with, like I said, with two kids in two different generations, right? Like, they actually fall into two different generations, and I see it in both of them. So I at the end of the day, all of us only have the next generation from a business perspective to carry on our businesses. It is sort of that simple. And so I don't know how else you do it if you don't generate, you don't create the next, slate of leaders in your organizations or, your slate. At the end of the day, I feel like if they're not 3 or 4 or 5 good extraordinary candidates, I should say, to choose from, then I think that's a reflection on me, right? And so, I sort of, at the end of the day, and where we have one of these going on in our but one of my colleagues has got this amazing promotion. I'm so happy for him. But behind him, there are four or 5 people we could choose from. They're all equally capable. And that's going to be a really hard choice for us. But you know what? Good for him. He's done his job. Like, it is clear he has mentored and developed and taken 3 or 4 or 5, probably 4 or 5 leaders through every piece of his job. He has developed them. He has mentored them. They have seen the cycles. And so it's going to be really hard for us to pick ultimately. And, I think we'll end up moving 2 or 3 of them into a variety of other roles because they're so ready. He has them so ready. That's a gift he's given to all of us. And that would be my business case for this. Like, have your next generation of leaders ready, right? And, keep your organization thriving accordingly. So that's my business plan.
Yeah, that's That's a great problem to have, isn't it? Having that mindset. And again, to me,
It
that's the
is.
ultimate of leadership, the ability to elevate others.
It's really impressive. So that'd be one. I think that, on the societal, I'll move sort of to the societal front of this. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
let's go to the
broader
bigger one of
picture.
life.
And maybe I'll give you two examples. Like I remember having this when I was, again, pregnant with my first, and I was going out on maternity leave, and I was talking to one of my clients who was very senior, a woman. And I was like, boy, this is a window of, it's a relatively big window of time. And they were going through a massive transaction. And I had some guilt about, going out during the middle of their transaction. I was leading that transaction. And she's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're like perpetuating life in the world. She had such a good, perspective. And I was like, I truly was feeling, like guilt. And she's like, like, who are we as a society if we're not going to support women, like bringing more life to the world, right? It was such a good perspective. And so like, I think about that in the context of us having maternity leave now and paternity leave, like we have equal paternity leave, which is amazing, right? So that, great men can also participate in raising our, children and having that, having kids have that same bond with their fathers. And so yeah, I was thrilled about that. So that's one. I just want to share as an example of like having a mentor that like in a business partner as a client say, what are you talking about? Like, why would you even think twice about that? The other one is the kid. When I think of my two sons, one is growing up in a generation that didn't grow up with a phone in, his hand or an iPad in his hand. The second one is, one that has grown up his entire life, right? Maybe not, and I don't think because Eric and I are bad parents, right? Like, because that is the generation that will have AI in their life, will have Fortnite, and will have virtual, ecosystems in their space. That's how they interact with their friends, right? That's how they have, play dates. He would want me to say that, are hangouts, right? That is a totally different generation. And so, I'm pushing their school, to say like, they have to have, chat GPT like they have to be prompt engineers. Like, we have to recognize they are who they are, and they're growing up in a world that will have that. And so it's just a different, it's a different, that's how they connect. Like that is how they connect. Sure, they need to develop one-on-one too. But like, I think we need to accept that is their world, that we will have 30-year-old CEOs, right? Because they're very technology advanced. That's how they want to grow up, how they want to buy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a great example. I think it sort of speaks to as parents, myself and my wife are parents as well, and we're also carers. So we look after sort of young kids more challenged and those sorts of things. And it's just that, and then, we're not yet grandparents, but becoming grandparents, like you just, as people, you are having children and have that privilege, you are just forced to grow. If you don't sort of take in what's coming in the outside world, love it or not, but you've got to grow with that. Otherwise, again, to the point of this whole conversation, we're not being the best mentors that we can be. We're not seeking the right help. We're not challenging ourselves, and we're not swimming off the shore and not seeing the
beach. Like, it's here, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to go with it and keep that positive attitude. That advice that your client and friend gave was fantastic advice. What greater gift is there than bringing life into the world, in my books?
Great.
Marna, let's start to bring this home a bit. But what I'd like to ask you before I get into our final question is, if somebody was talking about you that knows you, again, in the business setting of EY and as a mentor, what would you like them to say about
what
you?
I like them to say? Well, I hope it would match what they would say. I hope they would. Yeah.
Well, we'll ask later on.
So I hope they would say I cared. Right. I think that's a huge one for me, that I cared personally and professionally. I'm thinking about like even people who have retired. I hope they would say I cared. I hope they would say that I had like really loved, like I loved, and therefore it made them love more. Like coming to work, what we did, it made a difference. In their daily, and their daily, their weekly, their monthly, their annual, their decade, right? Of showing up every day, and serving our clients and serving each other. that it made a difference in, getting out of bed and having a passion for work, for what they did in their career. I think those two things would be the big things for me. Yeah.
Sounds all right to me. Where does this drive for care come from?
Good. I picture, like, when you ask me that question, I picture sitting at this table with my grandmother, who didn't have much. It's my mom's mom. Her name was Goldie. And she just was so content and so simple. And she was I'm one generation off the farm. And I don't know. I just had this deep, this deep connection to her and my cousins, we all did. And she was so simple. And I think we all just wanted to take care of her. Right. Just, she had such beautiful work ethic and was happy, and life was really simple, and and she asked for nothing. And so I think we all just sort of had this strong desire to give back accordingly.
Love it, Marna. Thank you for sharing that. Marna, what is the one thing that has helped you become a confident leader? And I warn you, because I've had to pick up another guest. He said to me, Brendan, there is no one thing. Just what is your one thing?
Maybe support, right? Maybe I've fallen down enough and been okay. Maybe it's that.
Just tell me a little bit more about support. How is that support giving you the confidence to be this, what perceived to be this confident leader that I see today?
I think you come to a place, and I tell people this all the time, you come to a place where, and I say this in my own mentee relationships. I'm I have the floor. I have I got you. I have the floor. So you can't go very far. It's just the floor. It's, there isn't far to fall. So you're good. Right?
I like
and
that.
So I've come to know, I have my own, I've got my own floor. I've come to a place in life where I'm I feel okay about having my own floor. But that might be it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, again, I've watched some of the interviews you've given. Again, I like to make sure I've got some preparation happening before the show and know a little bit about my guests before I actually meet them. So I appreciate your candidness, your honesty. I sort of feel that I've really enjoyed the conversation, but I have to say that I guess what's been nice is I feel like maybe, you tell me if I'm wrong, but you've said you're in your own home. You actually look and feel more relaxed in your own home. And it's actually made for, not that I was worried there wasn't going to be a great conversation, but I feel like it's just given us the opportunity to have a really great conversation because you're so relaxed in your home where your family is and stuff like that. So it's been a fantastic conversation, Marna. I really thank you for the time you've spent with us and for sharing sort of the gift of your knowledge to our listeners today. Thanks for being a fantastic guest
My
on
pleasure.
The Culture of
It's
Leadership.
great to be home. It's great to be with you. I just look at it as a way to give back to the people who have given to me. So thank you for that, Brendan.
My pleasure. Keep doing it. Marna shared this quote by William Faulkner. If you want to swim for new horizons, you have to be willing to no longer see the shore. A good mentor supports you on this journey. These are my 3 key takeaways from my conversation with Marna. My first key takeaway: confident leaders seek mentorship. They're not afraid to ask for advice or guidance, seeing it as a way to level up their game. Even if you're at the top, you need to stay humble and be open to new ideas. Building a strong network of mentors means you can tap into it whenever needed. My second key takeaway: confident leaders treasure life's lessons. They take wisdom from every corner: sports, family, relationships. Even in tough times, they draw out the positives from it. Every experience leaves a mark on them, shaping their future. My third key takeaway: Confident leaders are energized by mentoring others. They lean in. Their enthusiasm is contagious. Their passion for growing others isn't just about sharing knowledge. It's about igniting the potential in others that they didn't know they had. This is the energy that drives great mentors. So in summary, my 3 key takeaways were: confident leaders seek mentorship. Confident leaders treasure life's lessons. And confident leaders are energized by mentoring others. Let me know your key takeaway on YouTube or at thecultureofleadership.com. Thanks for joining me, and remember, the best outcome is on the other side of a genuine conversation.